I hope you're excited to start your third project, where you'll design a product for social good. You'll start by designing a dedicated mobile app, and then create a responsive website later in the course. You'll use all of the skills you've learned so far in this program in a real-world context. You'll start by learning about progressive enhancement and graceful degradation, which are approaches you can take to design across devices and products. Next, I'll highlight why it's important to focus on the user in all of our work by sharing perspective from Google. Then, we'll discuss how to design across devices and screen sizes. To help you design seamless user experiences across devices, I'll teach you about the 4 C's. I'll also introduce you to the differences between dedicated mobile apps and responsive web apps. With all of this new knowledge, you'll begin your final portfolio project. You'll start with the Empathize phase, where you'll create empathy maps, personas, user stories, and user journey maps. Then, you'll move on to the Define phase, where you'll identify the user need your project will focus on and build a problem statement. Finally, you'll make your way into the Ideate phase, where you'll conduct a competitive audit and come up with ideas for your dedicated mobile app design through sketching. There's a lot to consider in this course, like choosing whether to solve a real need in your own community or to use a Designing for Social Good prompt from Sharpen. The opportunity to have a positive impact on the world around you is endless. So let's get started. You're getting ready to begin the design process for your third project, where you'll design both a mobile app and responsive website. Up until this point, throughout the certificate program, you've designed a standalone mobile app and a responsive website for 2 different prompts. Now it's time to bring together all that you've learned to design a mobile app and responsive website to address the same user problem. As you embark on this project, you might be wondering, should I start to design the mobile app or responsive website first? That's exactly what we'll discuss in this video. As a UX designer, our goal is to always put the user first and keep their needs front and center. When it comes to designing across devices and products, like you'll be doing in this project, there are a couple approaches you can take. The first approach is known as progressive enhancement. Progressive enhancement means designing from the smallest screen to the largest screen. The progressive enhancement approach is also known as bottom-up designing, because you first design for the smallest and most basic version of your site, like for a mobile phone, and then embellish your designs for larger screen sizes. The progressive enhancement approach allows us designers to focus on the basic capabilities of the product we're designing at the beginning of the project. By starting with a small screen size, we have to choose the most important elements to prioritize on the screen. Then, we can add more advanced features and interactions as we move to larger devices and screen sizes. As a designer, using the progressive enhancement approach allows you to highlight the most important content from the start and come up with a clear vision of how the website should appear on all device sizes and types. Progressive enhancement is closely related to a mobile-first philosophy. A mobile-first philosophy means that we start by designing the mobile version of a product and later adapt it to fit larger screens, like tablets, laptops, and desktop computers. In the past, many designers started with the desktop version of a website and then tried to adapt it for smaller screens, like tablets and mobile phones. But in recent years, a mobile-first approach has become increasingly popular in the world of UX design. Why? Well, each year, the number of mobile phone users around the world grows. Since we're designing with users' needs front and center, this means designing for the devices and screen sizes they're using most. But as you might have guessed, designing from the smallest screen to larger screens is not the only way to go. In fact, you might follow exactly the opposite approach, which is known as graceful degradation. Graceful degradation means designing from the largest screen to smaller screens. The graceful degradation approach is also known as top-down designing because you start with a large screen with a lot of features and interactions, and work your way down toward a smaller screen, where the features and interactions are scaled back. The graceful degradation approach became popular among UX designers when desktop computers were the most used device. We'd start with the desktop version of a website, since that's where the users were most, and then try to adapt our designs for smaller screens, like tablets and mobile phones. With these two approaches in mind, which should you use as you design your third project in this program? You should decide based on the user you're trying to serve. For example, if the user you're designing for is in an emerging market or is an online shopper, then using a progressive enhancement approach probably makes sense. This way, you can focus your design on a mobile phone screen first, which is what your user is most likely to use. On the other hand, if the user you're designing for is a student in a classroom, a graceful degradation approach might make sense, so you can prioritize the desktop computer experience. Having a clear picture of the type of user you're designing for is key before you get too far into the project. This is part of the reason why the design process starts with empathy, so you can get to know your users well. Okay, there's a lot for you to think about when it comes to your first project and the user you're designing for. To provide you with a little more food for thought, I'll share Google's philosophy on prioritizing the user in the next video. Meet you there. You've just learned about progressive enhancement and graceful degradation, which are two approaches for designing across devices and screen sizes. In this video, I'll share some inside scoop about how Google focuses on the user in all of our work. Here at Google, we hold our values near and dear. We've written them up as 10 things we know to be true, and the very first one is all about the user. Our mantra is, focus on the user and all else will follow. Since the beginning, Google has focused on providing the best user experience possible. Whether we're designing a new internet browser or changing the Google search homepage, we take great care to ensure that our products will ultimately serve the user, rather than our own goals or bottom line. Google has adapted its range of products over the years to ensure we're focusing on the user first and foremost. Think about Google Maps, for example. Across devices and screen sizes, a couple of things about Google Maps are consistent. First, there's a search bar at the top of the page, because we know users are coming to Google Maps to search for specific locations or landmarks. If you use the mobile app version of Google Maps, there's even a microphone in the search bar to allow users to speak their requests. We know users of the mobile app are likely to be on the go, so typing in the search bar might not be easy. This is just one example of designing with our users in mind. Second, the Directions button is easy to identify in a bright blue color because we know users often use maps to navigate. This emphasis helps users quickly find the most common user flow, which is finding directions. Like I mentioned, at Google and as a UX designer in general, you need to be focused on the user and their needs. One way this philosophy comes to life at Google is when we're designing for access and equity. Think back all the way to the beginning of the program, when you learned about the next billion users, or NBU. These are the billion people around the world who are accessing the web for the first time. As they become regular internet users, the chance that they will be using a mobile device is very strong. So designing solutions based on a mobile-first philosophy ensures that the content, interactions, and features of the product will be accessible for all of these new potential users. This isn't just a trend for the next billion users, though. The first or primary device for accessing the internet for the vast majority of people around the world is a mobile phone. 10 or 15 years ago, personal desktop computers wired to the internet at businesses, schools, and homes were the only ways people got online. But this setup required infrastructure and privilege that most people didn't have. Mobile phones have democratized internet access due to their relatively low cost and ubiquity, and billions of people around the world are feeling the transformative power of having the world's information universally accessible and useful. Mobile users are key to the market, and their influence continues to grow. Whether your focus is on helping people find directions or reaching the next billion users, knowing your user and their context is the most important thing to keep in mind as you design. You're getting ready to begin the design process for your third project, where you'll design both a mobile app and responsive website. Let's discuss how to design a consistent and cohesive experience across both. UX designers have to plan for a nearly endless number of different devices, their screen sizes, and input methods like keyboard or microphone. Why? Because the number of devices available to experience content on is constantly growing and changing. Plus, a user is likely to look at the same website across devices like their mobile phone, tablet, laptop, and TV, so they should all be consistent. When you're building a new product, it's important to focus your design process on one device first. Start on the device where your target audience, also known as target users, spends the most time doing tasks that are similar or related to the tasks you're designing for. There's no one-size-fits-all answer here. It depends on the project and your target audience. Designing across devices requires knowledge of how each of those target audience would want to interact with the product. The way users interact with mobile devices or smartwatches will probably be different from how they interact with the website they're viewing on the desktop. You can figure this out as part of the UX research process. To design effectively for a specific device, there's a lot to consider. First, you have to be mindful of the device's screen size and resolution as you map out your product's user experience. Resolution is the level of sharpness and clarity of an image. In addition, you need to figure out the context of use, or how and when users will use that device. It's also important to think about how the functionality of your design will be different for each device based on how users interact with it. Knowing the interaction context is important because it helps you understand the different types of input methods, like a touchscreen, keyboard, mouse, switch, or microphone that your users might use to interact with your product. Finally, consider the content layout, or how information is organized on the screen. The layout affects how users access information effectively and influences your content's readability. As we design for more than one device, we have to be sure that we're providing a smooth experience across all devices. To do that effectively, we have to design with the 4 C's in mind: consistency, continuity, context, and complementary. Consistency means having a uniform design, so users can expect the design to feel familiar across devices and products. Take Google, for example. When you log into any Google product, you'll always find your profile in the top right of your screen. This placement might seem like a minor detail, but when users know that they can always find their profile in the top right of their screen, it creates a consistent user experience. Continuity means providing users with a smooth and uninterrupted experience as they move between devices. Without continuity, users can become frustrated and confused. For example, imagine you're designing a website and app for email. A user should be able to start writing an email on their laptop, save it as a draft, and finish that email later through an app on their mobile phone. Context means designing for the needs of a specific device and the way in which the user will use that device in any given situation. For example, imagine that a user has an email app on both their phone and smartwatch. They're probably not going to compose an entire email on the small smartwatch screen. But they might still want to get notifications about new emails, see important messages, and have quick responses ready. Designers have to think about the context of the user situation and adapt the design for the way the users interact with each device. Lastly, complementary means taking into account how each device can make the overall user experience even better. For example, imagine you might have a family member that you keep in touch with over email. You might write most of your emails to them through the desktop version of the product, But you might build on those emails using the product's complementary mobile app, which has features like adding photos directly from your phone. Now you're familiar with 4 ways to provide your users with a smooth experience across devices. Coming up, we'll zoom in on one widely used device, the mobile phone, and discuss the difference between a web app and a mobile app. You've just learned how the 4 C's can help you create the best user experience with your dedicated mobile app and your responsive website. Keep consistency, continuity, context, and complementary in mind as you move forward in this course. As you know by now, for your third portfolio project, you'll design a dedicated mobile app and a responsive website. That's what you'll build throughout this course. To set your project up for success, you need to know about the differences between dedicated mobile apps and responsive web apps. That's exactly what we'll cover in this video. So, what is the difference? A dedicated mobile app is built to live on the mobile device and is accessed through an icon on the phone's home screen. Dedicated mobile apps are also called native mobile apps. A responsive web app is an actual website that adapts to the device the user is on and is accessed through a mobile phone's web browser. Imagine you're looking for a job and using your mobile phone. You receive an email from LinkedIn with a link to a job opening on their platform. When you click the link to the job posting, you're prompted to sign into your LinkedIn account using the LinkedIn app on your mobile phone or an internet browser. The option on the left takes you to a dedicated mobile app that you have downloaded to your phone. The option on the right takes you to the main LinkedIn website on your phone's internet browser, which is known as a responsive web app. If you've faced a situation like this before, you already understand how dedicated mobile apps and responsive web apps work. Both will give you the same information, in this case about the job posting on LinkedIn, but the experience of using the dedicated mobile app versus the responsive web app on your phone will be different. Let's explore some of the advantages and disadvantages of dedicated mobile apps and responsive web apps. We'll start with the advantages of dedicated mobile apps. With dedicated mobile apps, an internet connection isn't needed after the app is downloaded and installed. Think of some of your favorite gaming apps that you can play on the go or in a plane without Wi-Fi or internet connection. Also, dedicated mobile apps work well with the device's built-in features like a microphone, camera, or location services. This allows for more personalization based on the user's preferences. Finally, you have more freedom in design. When you're designing for a dedicated mobile app, you have more visual and interaction options like gestures and animations. There are also disadvantages to dedicated mobile apps. First, dedicated mobile apps are more expensive to build than responsive web apps. Second, they require a different version based on the mobile device platform they're being built for, Android or iOS. They also have to go through approvals before launching on the App Store for iOS or Google Play for Android. Finally, mobile apps take up space on the device, since they have to be downloaded. Oftentimes, less expensive devices have more limited storage, which can make downloading mobile apps a challenge. Okay, you're learning the ins and outs of dedicated mobile apps. Let's shift our focus now to talk about responsive web apps. What are some of the advantages of responsive web apps? Web apps are faster and cheaper to build than mobile apps, which can save time, resources, and money for your team. Also, web apps run on a mobile phone's web browser. Think of the information you find on the internet using your phone. This allows users to access content without downloading an app first, and saves valuable space on a user's phone. Finally, as web apps are responsive, the content can easily be viewed on all devices. Remember, responsive web design allows a website to change automatically depending on the size of the device. However, web apps also have disadvantages. First, using a web app requires an internet connection or cell signal. A user cannot access them offline. This could make your website more difficult to access for the next billion users or for users in remote areas. Second, web apps can be hard for users to find. Even though they show up in search, they are not listed in an app store. Finally, it can be difficult to maintain a responsive web app and make sure it works across all mobile screen sizes. The good news is, you already have experience with designing both of these user experiences. Your first project in the program was designing a mobile app, and your second project was designing a responsive website. Now, as you're bringing all of this knowledge together in your third project, you will have the opportunity to design the best possible user experience for both a mobile app and a web app. You're ready to start the design process for your final portfolio project. As you might remember, the first phase in the design process is to empathize. Empathy is the ability to understand someone else's feelings or thoughts in a situation. You'll conduct research and meet with real users in order to understand their goals, their motivations, their pain points, and the causes of their pain points. Deeply understanding users' needs helps you create well-researched personas that'll lay the groundwork for your product design. This phase of your design work centers around personas, user stories, and user journey maps. You'll use the insights you gain from completing the Empathize phase of your work to create a more focused, user-centered design. Ready to enter the Empathize phase? Let's get to it. If we want to build great user experiences, it's important that we empathize with and understand our users. Empathy helps us identify user needs and problems. And as a reminder, meeting user needs and solving their problems is our ultimate goal as UX designers. One of the ways that you can truly empathize with users is by studying them and creating an empathy map. An empathy map is an easily understood chart that explains everything designers have learned about a user. Empathy maps have 4 sections that show us what a particular user says, thinks, does, and feels. So why are empathy maps important? Well, empathy maps help us get into the user's mindset, which allows us to better identify their pain points. Pain points are any UX issues that frustrate the user and block them from getting what they need. When working on projects for social good, it's more important than ever to take the time to really understand the challenges users might be facing. You should also consider partnering with an organization who knows the community well to help you find individuals who can accurately represent the needs of the community. Empathy maps are meant to be accurate representations of how users think and feel, and should be based on realistic needs and challenges. Now, it's time for you to create an empathy map for your portfolio project. Good luck. It's time to start creating personas from your user research. In UX design, personas are fictional users whose goals and characteristics represent the needs of a larger group of real users. Although you could write a list of product requirements that are needed to meet the needs of users, giving traits and requirements an identity encourages designers to remember that they're trying to help real people with a real product. Personas turn words and ideas written on paper into users who need your product in their lives. Personas are also one of the most effective ways to give a clear direction to your solutions. Changing a persona can change what you'll design. A great persona includes relevant information about your target user's life. The template for creating personas can include age, education, location, family situation, occupation, goals, and frustrations. You should also consider ability, gender, and race in your personas too. These identifiers give you, as the designer, a more well-rounded idea of who your users are. They also help get you thinking about why these people need your product. By creating well-defined personas, you can stay focused on what your users really need and design specifically for them. Start with a name and an image. Then you can start loading in personal details about the persona's character and some likes or dislikes. You'll need to create at least 2 types of personas for your project in this course. The first persona will be for a user who needs or prefers a dedicated mobile app. And the second persona will be for a user who will be accessing a responsive website from a computer, mobile phone, or other device. When designing for social good, you'll need to create additional personas to represent the diverse needs of the community you're designing for. Even though a persona is a fictional user, everything about them should be based on data or insights from real users. Avoid the temptation to create qualities or traits that you don't find in your research. If a persona you're creating starts to resemble you or your friends, it's a good indication that you need to double check your work. That's it for now. Coming up, you'll take what you've learned and use it to create your personas. Good luck. You've learned about your users and built personas. Now, let's discuss user stories. A user story is a fictional one-sentence story told from a persona's point of view to inspire and inform design decisions. User stories deepen your ability to connect to your users' needs by prioritizing design goals and inspiring empathetic design decisions. The stories help to expand on the personas you created earlier. You might remember our handy user story formula. Here it is. As a role, I want to action so that benefit. In this formula, the role represents who, the action represents what, and the benefit represents why. And if we've put those pieces together, our user story starts to take shape. A good user story is able to connect the personas you've created to a specific goal that the users would like to accomplish. User stories help UX designers remember the user's perspective and identify potential user pain points. Now it's your chance to create user stories based on the personas you've already developed. You'll want to create one user story for each persona. Now it's time to create user journey maps. As a reminder, a user journey is the series of experiences a user has as they interact with your product to achieve a specific goal. The journey helps UX designers expand on the ideas from the user story. User journey maps help to create obstacle-free paths for your users, reduce the impact of designer bias, highlight new pain points, and identify areas for improvement in your design. With these benefits in mind, we can build the path to map our user's journey. First is step 1. Add each action in their journey until the user reaches their goal. Step 2. Add descriptions for each action. Step 3. Add how the user feels at each point. And finally, step 4. Add opportunities for improvement. Be sure to use your research as your guide. Even if you're a member of the community you want to serve through your design project, always check your assumptions about how the user feels at each point in the user journey. A user journey map helps you frame the user's needs more clearly, which leads to the next step of the design process, defining. But before you can define the user's problem, you need to create user journey maps. So get to it. Now that you've worked through the Empathize phase of the design process, it's time to put everything you've learned so far into action. You might remember that the second phase of the design process is called the Define phase. This is when you use your research from the previous phase to determine specific, solvable pain points for your design. In this stage of the process, you need to propose a specific, measurable product solution that best addresses your user's goals and pain points. As a reminder, a problem statement is a clear description of the user's need that should be addressed. Great problem statements are human-centered while being broad enough to allow for creative freedom and narrow enough to be solved by a design solution. Keeping these qualities in mind will help you create a clear and actionable problem statement. Our problem statement formula is simple. Drawing from our research, we use our persona's name, characteristics, and needs to provide insights into their goals. Problem statements are a succinct way to reference your user's needs and establish the intent of your design. At this stage of your project, You've done the empathizing and identified user pain points, but you need a clear vision that helps you move forward with the design. Problem statements help create that vision. Now it's your turn to define the problems your users are facing. Create a couple of problem statements, and I'll meet up with you after. So you've just finished the define phase of the design process. Now that you've defined your users' problems, you can start to ideate solutions to solve those problems. During this phase, you'll sketch some ideas for implementations and interfaces that your user can interact with as part of your design solution. This is when you get to put all that research from the first two stages of the design process into action. In this phase, you'll come up with a couple of key deliverables. A competitive audit to check out the strengths and weakness of your competitors. And second, ideation sketches through an exercise called Crazy Eights. During the ideation phase, you might use additional methods to come up with ideas like how might we and storyboards. But we won't focus on those for this portfolio project. Ideation is also the phase where you collaborate more with other team members and do lots of creative brainstorming. Brainstorming and collaborating help UX designers continue to innovate and improve on their designs. When you're designing for social good, it can be helpful to share your early ideas with the community members you're designing for to get feedback and directional guidance. Your design process for this project might be more participatory because you want to ensure the ideas you've come up with solve the real problems your users are facing. So, are you ready to start ideating? Let's go. Before we kick off the ideation process, let's first do a competitive audit. As a refresher, a competitive audit is an overview of your competitors' strengths and weaknesses. These audits collect information about what your competitors are doing, including what techniques are working for them and what techniques are not. Competitive audits present you with more possibilities for solving your problem statement, and they give you some strategic insights for planning the next steps of your design. It's important to learn more about your product's competitors before you start to ideate on your own product designs. Competitive audits also help you understand what user needs are already being met in the marketplace and how your design can improve on current solutions. The first step is to outline the goals for your competitive audit. This should include specific information about your product, your users, and the product's industry. The second step is to create a list of your competitors. You can do this using a document or spreadsheet. The third step is to identify the specific features of your competitors that you want to focus on. Then fourth, you'll research each product. You'll use your list of competitors and specific features to guide your research about their products and organizations. Fifth, you'll analyze your findings. Try to identify patterns and gaps in your research findings. This is where you use data to reach conclusions about your competitors. And finally, during the sixth step, you'll summarize your findings and conclusions in a report or presentation. Keep in mind, if your app and website serve a community need that has not been met before, it may be difficult to find direct competitors. If this happens for your project, look for more indirect competitors like organizations with a similar goal serving other communities. Great. Now it's time for you to complete a competitive audit. Have fun scoping out the competition. Scoping out the competition can help you start to come up with creative solutions for your problem statement. Before you get too far into the ideation phase, you need to make a decision about which device or screen size you'll design for first. Why? Well, most designers prefer to start designing for one device or screen size and get that design through the high-fidelity prototype stage before moving to a second device. Designing for one screen size first allows you to validate your product design, establish a clear user flow, and make decisions about the visual design of your product before moving forward. The insights you gain from working on the first device will enhance your designs for the second device. Let's discuss some of the questions that UX designers ask themselves when evaluating which device to design for first. To get started, ask yourself, where are your users located geographically? For example, if you're designing for a user that's located in an emerging market, they're probably more likely to access your product on a mobile phone rather than a desktop computer. In this case, you'd want to take a mobile-first approach to your design process. Second, where will users be when they access your product? At home? At school? At work? Or on the go? For example, imagine you're designing a math tutoring product for middle school students. The student's experience with your product design will be very different if they're at home using a laptop computer, at school using a desktop computer, or on the go using a mobile phone. You'll need to determine which of these contexts you'd like to optimize your designs for. Third, how reliable is your user's internet access, cellular access, or Wi-Fi signal? For example, do your users live in a place where internet access is available but slow? Or do they live in a more remote location where there is no internet access at all? In either of these cases, choosing to design a mobile app first makes more sense, as it could be downloaded when they have access and then used in offline mode. Considering the answers to these questions for your product and target user will help you determine which device to design for first. For the purposes of this course, you'll design a dedicated mobile app first, followed by your responsive website. Following this order will allow all of us to learn together as we go through this course. It's an exciting time in the design process. It's time to start sketching. Sketching is all about exploring lots of ideas at a rapid pace so you can think creatively with no limits. You'll use the problem statement you created earlier to ideate with a Crazy 8s exercise. Let's go over the setup for Crazy 8s in case you need a refresher. Grab a large sheet of paper and a pen or pencil. Fold it in half. Then fold it in half again. Then in half one more time. Open it back up. Now you've got 8 spaces for 8 different ideas. Sometimes I like to draw lines on the folds of the paper to make the 8 spaces clearer. Okay, now make sure you have your problem statement available to guide your ideation. Then start your timer for 60 seconds. Don't forget to stick to those 1-minute intervals for each of the 8 ideas you're sketching. The goal here is quantity, not quality, and you may also think of new approaches that you had never considered before. Okay, you're ready to kick off some quick ideation now. You'll use basic shapes to represent what your website and app could look like on a desktop or mobile device. Remember, designers often use a simple rectangle or square to represent a photo, rectangles for buttons, circles for icons, and lines for text. The goal of the Crazy 8s exercise is to come up with rough sketches of your future product, in this case, a dedicated mobile app. You'll take some of the ideas you come up with during this exercise and use them in your wireframes later. The only limit with this technique is the time allotted, so push yourself to be as creative as possible. So have fun and get sketching. You began a new project designing for social good. You've worked through the empathy, design, and ideate phases of the design process. Let's take a brief pause to reflect on all you've done in this part of the course. You started by learning about progressive enhancement and graceful degradation, which are approaches you can take to designing across devices and products. Next, I shared a little bit about how Google focuses on the user in all of our work. Then, we discussed how to design across devices and screen sizes. To help you design seamless user experiences across devices, you'll need to keep the 4 C's in mind: consistency, continuity, context, and complementary. You were also introduced to the differences between dedicated mobile apps and responsive web apps. With all of this new knowledge, you began your portfolio project from the very beginning. You started with the Empathize phase, where you created personas, user stories, and user journey maps. Then you moved on to the Define phase, where you identified the user need your project will focus on by building a problem statement. Finally, you made your way into the Ideate phase and came up with ideas for your dedicated mobile app design through sketching. Now you're ready to create wireframes. As you move into the next part of the course, remember to keep your user front and center. Meeting users' needs should always be your top priority. Gather up all your supplies and let's start working on wireframes.
Congratulations on finishing this course from the Google UX Design Certificate. You can access the full experience, including job search help, and start to earn your certificate by clicking on the icon or the link in the description below. Watch the next video in the course by clicking here, and subscribe to our channel for more from upcoming Google career certificates.